are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again. Today, we have a special guest. We have our guest for today, Karen Laos. She has a cool website you want to check out. It's KarenLaos.com. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about confident communication, speaking up and getting what you want by asking for it. We have a good opportunity to unpack all that. But before we do, we're going to learn a little bit more about Karen and what she does as a communication expert and confidence cultivator. So welcome to the show. Karen, how you doing?
Thanks so much, Shamaya. I am doing great. I'm having a moment because I'm thinking about the day that I was sitting in a boardroom surrounded by my peers, and I was being flown all over the world to speak on stages at places like Google and Facebook and Starbucks and the like. And yet I found myself totally tongue-tied in front of my own peers. And my boss had to shut down the meeting. It was so bad. And that was the day that I decided I was never going to let that happen again. And my boss was awesome because she shut it down in the most gracious way. And then she pulled me aside after and she said, Karen, this was such a great example where once again, you didn't trust your gut. You could have just said, hey, I can't remember why we decided to, present on this topic in the first place or what we were doing. So let's table this and talk about it another time. And that never would have occurred to me because I grew up where the authority figure told you what to do. In my home, my dad was the authority. My mom did what he said. And I learned that that's what you had to do. And it never occurred to me that I could have tabled that topic. But I had an internal conflict and I didn't agree with what my boss had asked me to present. And if I had simply spoken up, it would have made all the difference. And what's interesting is that I spoke up in so many other situations, but that particular person I had such a hard time with. And that's a little bit about what caused me to jump into my mission, which is to eradicate self-doubt in 10 million women in the next 10 years. And that gives me focus 100% because I realized what it was like to feel free. And once I realized, oh my gosh, this is amazing to be free to speak up and not doubt yourself to the point where you're so dependent upon what other people think that you can't say anything. Once I got past that, I wanted to help other people do it. So that's a little bit about my story, which launched me to leave my corporate career in 2020 at 52 years old.
I mean, your career is pretty polished resume. You also been on stages such as NASA. And I mean, that's very interesting because when you come from this point of self-doubt, but you were able to hang with the big leagues, if I can say that. Kind of break that down for the audience because it's like, wait, you had all this in you, but you still had self-doubt. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a compelling question. Well, if I think back to my childhood, when I was 6 years old, my dad gave me a few dollars at a flea market and he said, go have fun, but never pay full price. And that is truly when my whole world around confident communication came into play. I never knew what negotiating was until then. And it's so interesting how we all grow up because I had a lot of mixed messages in my childhood and I realized a lot of other people have similar experiences. And for me, my dad taught me this external confidence that I've always been overconfident related to my abilities. And yet, in certain circumstances, I felt so tied up in knots around the self-doubt component And the truth is, as a kid, I was always trying to please my dad, because as much as he taught me those things, it's interesting. He taught me those things, but even as I say that, I think he didn't really teach me those things. And what I mean by that is he didn't sit down and say, here's how you negotiate. Here's how to blah, blah, blah. It was all through the way that he modeled things just by me watching how he did things. And at the same time, I watched my mom. And my mom at home didn't have a voice. So I grew up with this mixed message of, you got to speak up. Oh, but not all the time. It's not okay for women to do that. And so the way that I look at it is that I had this confidence related to my performance. And if I performed well, if I created value for people, then I was valuable. But I never thought that I personally was valuable. If you stripped away all of the accomplishments and all of the career, all of that, I probably didn't, until maybe my early 40s, believe that I personally had value. Maybe I knew it intellectually, but I definitely didn't believe it emotionally. So that's how I would describe that.
So that's interesting. So you knew you had it because you delivered, for your job, for your career. You had something that you used that other people will recognize and appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also saying there's another side that you felt was, I don't know how I can say this, was boxed in, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
And not allowed out. So when you finally found that process to get out that box, I mean, was it awkward, or was it like, okay, it's about time to be free?
It was both. How I would describe it is, first of all, I've always been a little obsessed with personal growth. I've always wanted to better myself. And at the same time, I was so calculated because I was so afraid of not being liked and so afraid of saying the wrong thing that might upset somebody. And that's what kept me in a box for so long. And so I don't know that I would describe it as this moment where, like, suddenly, you switched on the light and everything changed. But I feel like it was an incremental commitment over the course of my life to want to get better and grow. And then that turning point in the boardroom that day was so embarrassing to me. And that was what I would say was the awkward part of the trying out different things. So for example, one of the tips that I give people is based off of, like, basically, how do you insert yourself in a conversation if you're not used to speaking up? And so much of my life, I was worried about, that not being liked, not being popular. And so what if I said something that might not be accepted or popular? And so one of the ways that I taught myself to do this, to try, and this was the part where I can still remember testing this out and going, oh, wow, okay, this actually worked and nobody died. I didn't get fired. And all I did was use these 3 words, and that's, here's my vote. Because it was my boss at one point, who was the president of the company where I worked. She said, you always come to meetings with all this great information and the research you've done, and then you present it to us and say, what do you all think? She said, I want to know what you think. And honestly, my jaw kind of dropped. I felt, I was sort of almost, it felt in a moment like I was found out, like, oh my gosh, somebody, I've been hiding so safely, so comfortably. And then somebody actually wants to know, and not just somebody, but my boss. And so I started by saying, here's all the research and here's what I would vote that we do. And somehow that felt direct, but still diplomatic. And that has worked really well for me. And I have found that a lot of people that are trying out the speaking up thing have found that to work as well.
And how important is that for someone who is trying to navigate their way through a certain career? Because it sounds like you have to switch your tone and how you see yourself when you're inside a room. Because you can be in a room and it's like, okay, how can I get everybody on my side? What do they want to hear from me? How can I set this up for them to basically control what it is that I want to say, but I'm not saying, because I'm trying to make it to where it's like everybody else is like winning this conversation. So how do you switch that tone to where it's like, okay, I can be confident enough to say what my vote is versus what I think others want to hear?
Yeah, it definitely starts with the belief in yourself. And yet so many people say, well, just believe in yourself. But how do you actually get there? And so I have a few exercises that help with self-doubt. And one of my favorites is a little unconventional, but what I love about it is that it's fun and it is also based on neuroscience. So for anybody listening, think about the strongest message of self-doubt that comes to your mind. So for many of us, it's things like, I'm not good enough. And we'll use that in this moment to model the exercise. Even saying it out loud, you can hear how it sounds down. There's a almost sad or just sad tone to it when I say I'm not good enough. And so the way to switch up the neural pathways in your brain is to sing it like a Broadway musical. And imagine if I say, I'm not good enough. I mean, suddenly it's a completely different tone, a different feeling. And most of us are laughing when we do this. And I've done this in group exercises before as well. And I have to credit my friend Rachel Grant for the person that I experienced first leading this workshop. And I was a participant. And the energy shift in the room, when you imagine 12 people going around the room sharing their strongest message of doubt. And then she acknowledged, do you feel how heavy it is in here right now? And then when we went around and we sang it and just belted out, it is such a different story all of a sudden. So that's one exercise. There's certainly a number of things, and I can offer a few more here as well. But it's not as if, one thing is necessarily going to be the be all end all, but we've got to stay committed to this, to working on our mindset and then working on the action. And it's like you've said before, and I heard in one of your interviews, of we can't just dip our toe in the pool. We've got to jump all in. And a big part of how to start jumping all in is simply to say something. So that's one of the exercises. I can give you more if you'd like.
Yeah. And real quick, you listen on Refocused Radio talking to our guest, Karen Laos. I like what you said earlier because I feel like no one wants to be in some kind of game environment where they're singing, I'm going to lose, I'm gonna miss this shot. I'm gonna let my team down. Like, no one's gonna sing those type of lyrics. If you're trying to win, I think your whole game is totally different. What you're saying to yourself is totally different. You're not focusing on the potential mishaps and defeat. You're really trying to do whatever you can to win that moment, that game, until the clock hits zero. So I think that's a good approach, because if you sing whatever is your thoughts, you might want to start changing the lyrics, because you start to find out, man, this is bad. This is not healthy at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what I would say too, I feel like there's two things to consider. One is the change in the synapses in our brain when we say the message of self-doubt and then we sing it or say it in a really voice that we would consider weird or that would make us laugh, can change up the tone related to what we're saying to ourselves. And then the other component is the self-talk that is positive, that we're focused on. And that is another exercise to me, the value of affirmations. Speaking what you want to believe, even if you don't believe it yet. So, for example, a lot of people have the fear around public speaking, although I have a little bit of a different take on that. A lot of people talk about public speaking, and I think, is there really such a thing as private speaking? Unless you're talking to yourself in the shower or in the car,
That's
we're
good.
always public speaking. Every time we open up our mouths, we have an opportunity to influence someone. And so one of those people is ourselves. And so, for example, an affirmation could be, people love to hear what I have to say. But if you pick one and keep it simple and say it to yourself regularly, have Post-it notes all over your house or, wherever you're comfortable. But the point is, the more you can see that message, the more that helps to build that confidence. So I'm a big believer in affirmations for sure.
You also have books that people can get as well. You have books, Trust Your Own Voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of relates in what we're talking about today with communication. When it comes to the book that you've written, Trust Your Own Voice, that's the same tone of what we're talking about, because this is a growth process that people have to get on, the journey themselves. Like no one can really teach you to be you. You have to almost teach yourself to be you, because when you give someone else that power to tell you who you are, then you kind of miss the whole point of living your life.
Yes, I could not agree more with that, because it's really setting yourself free to be the greatest version of yourself. Or ultimately, at the first step is to stop trying to be who you think other people want you to be. And I definitely can relate to that, because so much of my life I was taught as a girl, or my coping mechanism rather as a girl was to do anything that I could to make my dad happy. So I grew up really being a chameleon. And I feel like so many of us wear a mask of some sort in different environments because it protects us and it makes sense and of why we do it. And yet, the more we dive into who we are and taking these small steps. So sometimes it's that, for example, that what I mentioned before of here's my vote. Or sometimes it's simply deciding I'm going to say one thing at this meeting or at this networking event or at this barbecue to someone that I don't know. It's that risk where we speak up. And when we start doing it, it gets easier. Like anything, like professional athletes, you gotta keep practicing. And then ideally you're getting feedback. You're watching the tape. I mean, literally that's what I do with my clients is they present something, then I watch the tape back. We watch it together and we celebrate their wins. And we also look at what blind spots they might have. So we all have those blind spots. And if we can also get people in our corner that support us to give us that feedback and to notice things. And sometimes a huge part of it too, if we go back to one of your earlier questions, I wanted to expand on the answer to that about influencing others in a room. A big part of it is, how am I coming across through my approachability, through people do business with people they like. And one of the ways that you can be likable is simply to have a smile on your face. And it's one of those simple things, but I see this all the time when people are presenting or they're really focused on what they're talking about. They get that furrowed brow, the resting bee face that we can often have. And if we can remember just sometimes even to raise our eyebrows, smile a little bit, look like you're interested in what you're talking about. That connection is so powerful. Because I remember when I was starting as a corporate trainer and my boss was listening to me to decide if I was good enough to present in front of clients. And after I presented, I had prepped long and hard for this. And afterward, she said, "Well, how do you think you did?" And I said, "I think I did great." And she said, "Well, if I really listen, Karen, your content was practically perfect. But the problem is you looked pissed off the entire time." She said, you didn't connect. And that's when I came up with the quote, "You can't sacrifice connection for perfection." So remembering that it's how we come across that is really important. And a lot of us don't think about that. Do we come across as credible in the way that we speak? Do we get to the point quickly? And I also have another tip around rambling, because a lot of us ramble. I'm a recovering rambler myself. And one of the tips that I recommend, probably my best tip around this, is when you notice yourself rambling, stop and pause, gather your thoughts for that second of the pause, and then say out loud, "And my point is this." And not only will that help you focus, but it helps your audience focus and go, "Okay, she has a point," or "He has a point, it's coming." So that's another tip that I found to help you find your voice.
No, that's good, because I remember the old days in podcast world. Landing the plane was almost impossible. That plane had a lot of gas, and it just seemed to go forever. But you're right, because when you get to the point, you go back to home base. It's like the way I think of it, because wherever your focus is, your point is, you're always going to come back home.
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, the listeners going to always know where you're going, because you're always coming back home. So whether it's the theme that we're talking about, confident communication, it comes with time. You become confident after every, swing of the bat. It's not like you just wake up one morning and all of a sudden, all those years that you were, lacking confidence just disappears, and you're just an amazing person. It's a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, I can even remember recently, I'm a TEDx speaker coach for the Minneapolis TEDx team. And I remember my first meeting there where we were watching the speakers, 6 people do their run-throughs for the first time. And I was new to the team. And I jumped in pretty quickly with my feedback and contributions. And it wasn't until about lunchtime that I thought, oh my gosh, a few years ago, I wouldn't have said anything right away. I would have waited, made sure it was safe for me to speak up, listen to everybody else first. And that was one of those moments, because for a lot of us, when we are on the growth journey, we often don't realize that we've grown until we find ourselves in a situation where we would have acted very differently. And we don't realize the growth that we've had until we're in that moment. And that was one of those moments for me where I thought, this is amazing. I felt free to totally be myself and contribute, not just my expertise, but be myself as a person. And to me, that is the nirvana stage. That is when we feel so free to be ourselves. I can't think of anything better.
Well, once again, having true honor talking to our guest today, Karen Laos. You can go to her website. It's easy. It's KarenLaos.com. And boom, just like that, it's like a vapor. Time just went by like nothing. So once again, I want to say thank you for taking your time talking to us today. What last thing will you say to our listeners before we let you go?
The biggest thing that I would say is that your voice is powerful. And I'd recommend that you use it and trust yourself.
Man, dropping the mic, literally. So once again, I want to say thanks to Karen Laos for taking time talking to us today. Visit her website, KarenLaos.com. Appreciate everything you do.
Thank you, Shemaiah.